prepared here, but I think I'm going to go informal on this, if you don't mind, and just talk to you about some things. Earlier, I asked you, well, actually, earlier, I asked you if you thought some of the stuff that's been going on in this country is kind of strange, and you all said, yeah. I got to ask you a couple other things. How many of you, and I need to know this, how many of you heard about cultural Marxism for the first time today? Oh, you're all familiar with it?
Quinn and Rose.
Quinn and Rose, okay. Well, let me see if I can expand on some of the stuff that Quinn and Rose talk about. That's a very good show, by the way.
Yeah.
That show is based on exposing cultural Marxism. When they're actively talking about it, they're exposing it, but even when they're not, that's what they're talking about. I hope what I say today enables you to better defend yourself in arguments and discussions with people when you bring up the subject of communism. The problem that I've seen ever since the fall of the Soviet Union is, if you use that communism word, you use the C word, people look at you like you've grown a set of antlers, okay? Oh, don't you know the communism's dead? Didn't you see the Soviet Union fall and all that stuff? Well, look, I stood there and watched the Soviet Union fall on television, and I said, okay, when is communist China with its 1.5 billion communists going to fall? Did I miss something? It didn't fall. Well, it's become capitalist. Don't you buy that? They still have a Politburo running everything over there. It's communist. Okay, Cuba is still communist. North Korea is still communist. Vietnam, all of Vietnam is communist. But that's not even the important part of this. If you wanted to make the case that that kind of communism is still around, you can make it easily. But here's the critical idea. There isn't one kind of communism. There are at least three major types. And I'm going to quickly go through the first two and get to the issue today. And maybe fill in the gaps of what you know about this. Obviously, the first kind of communism was the kind written about by Karl Marx. He put that together first in the Communist Manifesto, later in his great work, Das Kapital, and in all kinds of other works that he did. He spelled out communism. But his kind of communism we call now in academic circles classical Marxism. It's become the old philosophical Marxism. To put it in a nutshell, what he believed was that history is determined by economic forces. You don't make choices, you think you make choices, but all your choices are predetermined by the economic situation around you, and the economic situation around you is predetermined by nature. You know, the same law as gravity. There's an economic law like there's a gravitational law. He believed that without any effort, the working man would eventually get so, he called them the proletariat, so if I use that word later, you'll know what it means. It means the worker. The worker will become so impoverished by the greedy bourgeoisie, that's the business owner, that eventually a revolution will erupt. It'll begin as a riot, it'll turn into a rebellion, it'll finally become a revolution. This is simply a stage of historical development. It's the last stage. It will happen without any agitators or even without he didn't found a communist party. He didn't think you need to. Well, he lived and died. That never happened. That's called spontaneous revolution, by the way. Spontaneous revolution didn't happen. Well, communists in Europe were crushed when the death of Marx was announced and there hadn't been a revolution. Didn't look like there was going to be one. Marx had predicted that the problem of the 20th century, the coming 20th century, would be overemployment. People herded into the factories until they became nightmares. Well, what was really happening? The problem of the 21st or 20th century was underemployment. Unemployment, okay? So, in Russia, there's a young man listening to all this. His name is Vladimir Lenin. And he decides he's going to grab the bull by the horns and make the revolution happen. He's going to get in there and form a communist party, and that communist party will engineer the revolution, and so that's called engineered revolution, or in academic circles, Marxist-Leninism. You've heard of that, right? Now, the Marxism you see around you in the world today, the Marxism you saw in the Cold War, was Marxist-Leninism, engineered revolution. But as early as 1919, right after World War I, some communists were seeing a potential problem with that. And the problem can be boiled down to this. The worker was supposed to reject World War I. He was supposed to abandon, he was supposed to do what the Russians did, okay? Walk out of the trenches, say, to hell with this, I'm going home, all right? And then rebel against the whole system. It didn't happen. People flocked to the recruiting organizations and centers, and you had a long, bloody war, and after which the people celebrated its end, but they didn't overthrow their governments. What they concluded, and among them was a young Italian communist by the name of Antonio Gramsci. How many have ever heard his name? If you listen to Quinn, I think I finally broke him of the habit of calling him Gramsci. I'm Salinski. He's not one of my guys. He's not Polish, okay? You Italians can own him, right? Italian communist by the name of Antonio Gramsci. In Hungary, there was a guy by the name of George Lukács. It looks like Lukács, but it's pronounced Lukács. And in Germany, a whole school of thought emerged called the Frankfurt School. Okay. Interestingly, later, to fast forward a little bit, the Frankfurt School ended up in New York City. They got chased out by Hitler, and so they came here and really fomented what we call the '60s revolution. But we'll get to that. What the cultural Marxists, as they're going to be called, the Gramsciists, concluded after World War I was that like Americans, and we'll focus on Americans. They were talking about Europeans and Americans at that time. Western civilization basically was too fat and happy to pull off any kind of revolution. After World War I, Ford was making, Model Ts at a breakneck speed. Americans were buying cars. Radio was invented. They looked around them and said, these guys are never going to rebel at this rate. Now, a sane individual would look around at the cause, at the need for the revolution, the oppression of the worker. He'd look around at the worker driving down the street in his car, and he'd say, this is all wet. We don't need a revolution, right? The workers are not oppressed. They're getting everything they want. The middle class is huge. And that's not what they thought. What they thought is now we have to come up with a way to get these workers into a rebellion and a revolution. What they came up with was this principle of hegemony theory. Don't need to know that. It's just a fancy term for cultural Marxism. What it was this. Gramsci argued that the problem in all of this is that the people of the West, people of America and Europe, they're Christians. They're Christians. They're living a worldview that says be passive, work real hard, you're responsible for yourself and all that stuff. That communism will never take root as long as they believe that stuff. Now, Marx had earlier said, back in his lifetime, when asked what it would take for communism to triumph, he said, quote, that thing in Rome has got to go. Now, you can imagine, it was never clarified. Marx left a lot of open ends. Well, what is in Rome? Fiat manufacture? I don't think that's what he meant. All right? He meant either the Pope, or the Vatican, or the Catholic Church. Why the Catholic Church, not the Protestant? Well, there are over 1 billion Catholics. Okay, that's the big chunk. You can take that down, you've got it all. And Gramsci's in Italy, which is a Catholic country. Okay, so Gramsci starts to outline a system where you undermine the culture, you attack culture in every place where you find vestiges of Judeo-Christian belief. Judeo, the Jewish Old Testament, Christian, the New Testament. Any place that there is Christianity, you attack all of the institutions. Now, you don't attack them with military force. What you do is you begin a long evolutionary process. This is also called evolutionary communism. And what you do is you start to convince people that there are flaws in these institutions. You find the failure and blow that up until that's the norm in the eyes of the people. Well, what institutions did he mean to attack? Obviously, you've got to attack and bring down Christianity. And by the way, if you can get some Muslims to help you in that, you're ahead of the game, okay? You got to bring down Christianity. Look, these people waving these flags out here. Another institution you have to bring down is patriotism. You have to get the people to mistrust their government. You have to get the people to hate their government. You have to get in government to do that. You have to get into government and make people not love it because it's no longer lovable. You have to turn the people against the government and the government against the people. How do you do that? You get control of the news media. You get control of movies. Lenin, the author of Russian Communism, already in the 20s observed, of all the media, cinema, he called it, movies are the most potent. They're the most powerful tool of communism. Why? Because in order to watch a movie at all, you have to suspend reality. If you don't suspend reality, you go to a movie, what do you see? You're seeing light flickering on a screen that looks like human beings. They're flat though, okay? And your sound's coming out of speakers. In order to enjoy a movie, you have to suspend the reality and enter into the movie. But once you've suspended reality, the scriptwriter of that movie can tell you anything. The less defenses you have, the less you know about that, the more open you are to being propagandized right in your entertainment. All the media had to be controlled. Schools had to be controlled. Okay? The public forum had to be controlled. Marriage and family had to be discredited. Now, you think the 60s revolution was I don't know if you think this or not, but a lot of people think, no, that's just the way that the culture's going, and we're getting to be an older culture, and you know, we're just losing interest in our basic institutions. No. Billions of dollars, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, were spent to produce that effect, to sour you on marriage, to sour you on family. There was a book called Eros and Civilization, written in the late 50s by Herbert Marcuse. He's going to look like Herbert Marcuse, but it's Herbert Marcuse. He's one of the founders of the Frankfurt School I told you about earlier. Fled Hitler, came to America, set up shop over here, okay? In that book, Eros and Civilization, he wrote that you're going to have to take the college students, you're going to have to bait the hook with sex, but give them communism. And that is exactly what he proceeded to do with the help of one Hugh Hefner and some other people during the 60s. He went to the college campuses, he addressed the college students, he saturated them with literature, and in a space of 10 years, you had an absolute moral meltdown in this country. It was no accident. It was engineered by the Frankfurt School, who got to virtually every professor in social science in this country. And they were all telling people the same thing. And once your kids think something, they're the next generation. What they think is going to be wrong. Okay? So they destroyed every aspect of Americanism. You could take those 5 things I told you about earlier, and you could go right down the list, and I can tell, we don't have time today, but I can tell you chapter and verse how communism attacked each and every one of those. On purpose, complicit with media, using education. Everything that you hold dear, because it is American and Christian, was marked for destruction. Now, here's the beautiful part of it. You don't need soldiers of the revolution. Once the American people's ears are open to this stuff, and once this starts filling their heads, guess who carries out the communist revolution? You do. You do by your beliefs, you do by your votes, you do by your very conversation. You become the soldiers of the communist revolution, and the beauty of it is you don't even know it. You think you're being modern, you're being with it, a political correctness. Well, we can't say anything that isn't politically correct. I'm doing it right now. Do you hear me? This is not politically correct. I would have yelled up there, but he already knows it. Political correctness was a term used in China during the Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong's last effort to communize China fully before he died. It was a bloodbath. People were not allowed to speak of things in public that were not conforming with communism. Children were sent into their grandparents' homes to rip out the Buddhist imagery, even the art on the walls, because it didn't conform to communism. It was a total bloodbath. In America, that term political correctness filtered over to the universities, who were all leftists, and they began using it as an inside joke. Well, I better not tell that joke we told last year because not politically correct. But then political correctness became a mantra. This is what we're going to tell everyone. We're going to censure everybody. And so political correctness is a part of cultural Marxism. Look, if I can control your speech by intimidating you on even the most minute issue, if I can get you afraid to not say, our men in the military, our men and women in the military, You know, and I don't mean any disrespect to women in the military, but when you carry out that brainwashing of I have to be gender specific or gender neutral as the case demands, you've already lost. You've already lost. When you have to, I was in a college classroom in the 1970s, and our English teacher came out and started this he, she, he. You seen that stuff? And we didn't want to do it. You know, that's crazy. Why would I mangle a sentence like that? And she said, "You guys just don't understand how important that is to the revolution. Okay? You just don't understand how important it is the way you talk to the revolution." And so we all started writing papers. He, she, he. Oh, another thing. Mess with the grammar. Make American grammar as unintelligent as you possibly can. I went back to my alma mater last March, not this past March, the March before that. And I went to see a philosophical presentation on one of the people I studied, Edmund Husserl. Okay? And I'm sitting through the first day. I don't hear any Husserl. Sitting through the second day. Finally, at the very end, the speaker gets up and he says, "Let me tie this all together for you. What we've been doing here is the work of Jacques Derrida." Well, then it hit me. Oh, my goodness, I know what they've been doing. Jacques Derrida was a French philosopher. What country? French philosopher. And he came up with a concept called deconstructionism. That's where you unhook the word from what the word means. You deconstruct it. Now think about that. If I can get to start calling this a horse, okay, and that over there cup, and mangle the language totally, you won't be able to communicate anything. Now, they don't want to do it that abruptly. But what the guy said in closing was, our job as communists is to eliminate every language on the face of the earth, because all of them came down from aristocracy, all of them came down from what he called feudalism. So English, even Spanish, they all have to go. We have to come up with a one-world language to fit the one-world government. He was dead serious, and he got a round of applause. I almost fainted. They're right behind him over there at Duquesne University. Now, this stuff is the norm on our college campuses. You want to speak against this stuff, you are risking getting fired. Okay? I spoke to our president and said, "You want to do this?" And she's fine. You know, okay with me. Give both sides. Okay, I'll give both sides. I'll get my side out. And so I'm kind of immune for that for the moment. But you go on a state college campus and you start talking like this, you're gone. You're out of there. Okay, you won't get tenure. And if you get tenure and start talking about this, you'll lose your tenure. Don't worry about that. They'll find a reason to dismiss you. So this has been the norm on college campuses since the late 60s. It is now filtering down to the high schools and to the grade schools and to the kindergartens and to the daycare. Have you heard about Heather Has Two Mommies?
Yeah.
That's an elementary school book, preschool even. Okay? All these movements, from the feminist movement, the gay rights movement, even portions of the civil rights movement, were taken over by the communists, are being used by the communists in a very studied, skillful way. That none of this is an accident. I know, this sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory. I don't know if I told you before. What right do I have to speak about this? I don't have a degree in communism. I got a degree in clinical psychology. So why can I tell you all this stuff? Where did I hear it? Quinn? Now, by the time I was 19, I was involved with the communists. I heard these plans being laid in 1970, okay? And all I'm telling you about now is what I heard in 1970 and what my eyes can see and my ears can hear all around me. I was a teacher at a Catholic college out in Indiana, and I went there to immerse myself in religion. And I found out that I was in the trenches with a semi-retired nun defending the church against the priests, who were all Marxists. Okay? Now, while I was out there, the Soviet Union fell. I went in the day that it fell, and we were supposed to hear a lecture from a guy who was a known communist. He was an anthropology professor. And he'd come up on stage, and we had a team teaching thing, okay, where 12 of us would listen to it, and then we'd break into groups and discuss the lecture. We'd take turns giving our lectures. He got up and he tore up his speech in front of everybody. He says, "A momentous thing is happening out there today, and I don't have time to do the speech that I was going to give you. I want to tell you about communism. I won't bore you with what he told them, but here was his closing line. He says, communism didn't fail in Russia because communism doesn't work. Communism failed in Russia because Russians are stupid. Now it's up to you Americans, all of us, to show the world how to do communism right. And those students trooped out of there, and they were filled with the gospel of Karl Marx. Okay? This has been going on since Gramsci in 1919 wrote the book. It was first published in the United States. Anyone guess what year it was published? 1959. What's that next decade after that called? The 60s. Did you see anything strange happening in the 60s? That was because his book hit the bookstores in college campuses in 1959. By 1960, every professor in every social science had already read the book twice and was now out to get you. Now, that's a lot to tell people when you challenge them about communism, or they challenge you about it. But now you know something. I don't think, how many of you knew all that? How many of you knew that before I started? Raise your hands.
No.
Yeah, Bob, I know you. Well, now you have a challenge. Now you can turn that back on them. You know, there are a lot of things you can start doing now that you wouldn't have thought to do before. You can ask your pastor what his beliefs are. Does he believe in a physical resurrection, for instance? If he doesn't, I can tell you right now, he's either a communist or he's what Lenin called a useful idiot.
Yep.
I didn't make up the term. You know what the term means? That's somebody who does communism doesn't even realize it. Do you know any useful idiots?
At Wall Street.
Could you find 5 if I asked you to find 5 for me? Could you find 10 if I asked you to find 10 for me? Places swarming, crawling with useful idiots. All I ask today is that none of us be among them. Find out what communism is doing. Stop doing it now. It's going to be hard for some people. It's going to be hard. Some of your families are invested in things that they think, you know, are American. Oh, that's another principle. Sell it as Americanism. Tell them this is what loyal... Who was it? Was it Clinton that says, if you're patriotic, you want to pay your taxes? No, that didn't go back that far. Who was it that said that? Yeah, it was in the last thing when the Tea Party was for. A patriot, I think it was Biden. Yeah, a patriot is someone who wants to pay his taxes. What's the matter with you? Are you anti-American because you don't want your money going to taxes?
You don't want to waste it.
Well, there it is right there. There it is right there. Well, that's all I got. Oh, no, I got 16 hours that you don't want to hear that. The crowd is dwindling here. I will take questions if you want to, either up here or informally. Anybody have any questions? Yeah, Bob.
It's not actually a question. You're talking...
Anyway, a microphone for the gentleman.
You were talking
We'll reach
about
that far.
political correctness. My favorite example is when they changed the name of personnel office to human resource office.
Yeah, absolutely.
What
Yeah.
is a lump of coal or a tree? They're natural resources, right?
Yeah, he's talking about when they started changing the names of everything from personnel department. Oh, no, we can't have personnel. Human resources. Now, what's so bad about that? Well, communists are materialists. They're materialists. They believe there's no such thing as personhood. You're just raw material. You're a human resource to be channeled like every other physical resource.
You're being brought down to the same
That's right.
level as
Yeah.
that tree over there.
Yeah, that's right. In communism, there's no transcendence of man, let alone transcendence of God. You're just another hunk of meat, abortion. Why do you think we can go with abortion? It's just a piece of tissue in there. And they believe that, but they believe that about you and about adults and about themselves. Don't look for any conscience or any sign of hint of salvation or anything like that from these guys. You're not going to see it. Don't look for any remorse. Don't look for any guilt. A communist is a sociopath. He has to be. He has to be, or he can't be a communist. He's an atheist, or he can't be a communist. All allegiance to the state, to the collective, none to God, not even to your country, because countries are going to be a thing of the past. I guess in closing, I just tell you people, I would raise that banner there and wave it as long as I'm allowed to do it, and then afterwards wave it some more. The time's coming where that's going to be a crisis. God bless the United States of America. God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we just found it on the speaker. If anybody's interested in the fair tax, the guy he wants to do about 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll get out of here.
There was some information on that smart meter.
All right, I'm Victor. We just want to really quick cover the fair tax thing. We think this is really important. What you've heard today is that we need to defund